The leaders of the 20 biggest economies are gathering in this vast exhibition centre here in London's Docklands, overlooked by the tarnished titans of international banking. Once neglected and run down, successive governments have revitalised the area. Gordon Brown is hoping this summit can do the same for the global economy. But can they unite on the big issues that have so far divided them? The United States and China argue that big fiscal packages, government spending and tax cuts are needed to stimulate the economy. But the current EU President, the Czech Prime Minister, Mirek Topolánek, has described US plans as the road to hell, and France and Germany are reluctant to increase their debt levels.
All countries agree that if one country spends on stimulating its economy, some of that flows over into imports, which benefit the exports of another country. So people do see that benefit, but that is a big step from that principle to actually coordinating when you spend, how much you spend, so that there is a global effort to stimulate their economies.
Seeing the current crisis as one that started in the US banking sector, the Europeans are arguing for tighter financial regulations. So too is Brazil's President Lula, who last week blamed the crisis on the irrational behaviour of white people with blue eyes. But can they get the Americans to agree?
The Americans will be more jealous of their sovereignty, so they'll think of better regulation in terms of perhaps having better international coordination, panels of supervisors, panels of international bankers, perhaps codes of conduct, but they'll be very wary of anything that looks like new international law.
The leaders of the so-called BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India and China, agree with others in the G20 that the International Monetary Fund needs much more support. But that support may depend on reform.
China's dangling this $100 billion carrot before the G20. But it's not going to come without strings. China, along with the other BRIC countries, are going to want to have a greater say in what the IMF does. But of course, the other countries of the world which have dominated the IMF for so long and dominated the other Washington institutions are going to be reluctant to give up power quite so easily.
There is a greater authority.
The failure of the last World Economic Summit to be held in London during the Great Depression opened the door to rampant protectionism, which devastated economies around the world. Now, 3/4 of a century later, the World Bank says most G20 members have introduced new protectionist measures despite pledging not to at their summit in Washington last year. The world will be watching this meeting to see if their leaders have learned the lessons of history. Matthew Moore, Al Jazeera, London.